When humans first populated North America and how they arrived has long been a matter of spirited debate. A recent study detailing what archaeologists believe are the oldest known footprints in the United States.
For nearly a century, we were told the first Americans were late to the party, arriving 13,000 years ago via a frozen bridge. But a series of bombshell discoveries from 23,000-year-old ghost footprints in New Mexico to an 18,000-year-old camel-hunting camp in Oregon has officially blown that timeline to pieces. We weren't just passing through, we were thriving in the heart of the Ice Age. This isn't just a correction of history, it's a total reimagining of the human spirit. The Oregon Time Capsule. September 14, 2007, was a significant date for missing person cases in the UK. But in the high desert of Riley, Oregon, the local soil was hiding secrets that go back much further than a few decades. At a site known as Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter, archaeologists stumbled upon something that shouldn't exist according to our old history books. Human life tucked neatly underneath a layer of 15,000-year-old volcanic ash. It's the archaeological equivalent of finding a modern cell phone inside an undisturbed Egyptian sarcophagus. The math simply doesn't work unless the timeline we've been using is fundamentally broken. The smoking gun at Rimrock Draw wasn't just a single artifact, but a perfect geological sandwich. In 2012, while excavating the shallow basalt overhang, the team discovered a thick, distinctive layer of tephra, volcanic ash from an ancient eruption of Mount St. Helens. Using chemical signatures, they dated this ash to roughly 15,000 years ago. Logic dictates that anything buried below that ash must be older, and what they found beneath it was a revelation. Fragments of tooth enamel from extinct Ice Age animals and exquisitely crafted stone tools. Among the debris were 27 pieces of tooth enamel, some large enough to fit across a human palm. These weren't from deer or elk. They belonged to camelops, a genus of giant prehistoric camel that once roamed North America, and bison antiquus, an extinct buffalo ancestor that would make a modern bison look like a house pet. Radiocarbon dating on the camel tooth enamel returned a staggering result: 18,250 years old. Even more startling was the discovery of two orange agate scrapers found 10 centimeters below those teeth. These weren't just random rocks. They were the essential tools of the Pleistocene, featuring serrated edges still stained with the blood of the animals they were used to butcher. This discovery destroys the Clovis first theory, which claimed humans only arrived 13,000 years ago. At 18,250 years, these Oregonians were living, hunting, and scraping hides 5 millennia before the supposed first Americans ever crossed the Bering Land Bridge. The presence of the Mount St. Helens ash acting as a seal proves that these artifacts haven't shifted over time. They are a frozen moment from a world we didn't think humans had seen yet. It's a compelling, undeniable reminder that we are much older guests on this continent than we ever dared to imagine. It forces a complete rethink of how we got here. If Oregon was the campsite, New Mexico was the playground. The ghost tracks of New Mexico. If the Oregon site gave us the tools and the timeline, White Sands National Park gave us the humanity. Located in the Tularosa Basin of New Mexico, this landscape is famous for its shimmering white gypsum dunes, but hidden beneath that sand is something far more precious: the world's largest collection of Ice Age footprints.
Researchers have spent years examining ancient footprints. A team of scientists discovered ancient animal tracks here over a decade ago.
These aren't just any tracks. They are ghost footprints. They are invisible to the naked eye most of the time, only appearing when the moisture levels in the soil are exactly right, before vanishing again as the sun bakes the earth. For years, these tracks were a curiosity, But in 2021, they became the epicenter of a scientific revolution that pushed the human story in America back to 23,000 years ago. What makes the White Sands discovery so visceral is that it doesn't just show us evidence of survival, it shows us evidence of life. While many archaeological sites are just piles of discarded stones or broken bones, these tracks capture a moment in time. Most of the footprints belong to teenagers and young children. Using seed samples found embedded within the footprints and later confirming the dates through 2025 using independent pollen and clay analysis, scientists realized these kids were running around at the height of the last glacial maximum. This was a time when massive ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere, yet here were families splashing in the mud of an ancient lakebed. The scene described by trackers is almost hauntingly relatable. In one set of tracks, you can see the path of a woman carrying a small child. Her footprints are deeper on one side where she shifted the toddler's weight. At one point, she sets the child down. Their tiny footprints appear in the mud, and then she picks them back up and continues her journey. All around them are the massive circular imprints of giant ground sloths and the towering tracks of mammoths. The humans weren't running away in fear. They were coexisting. In some spots, a teenager's tracks actually step inside the footprint of a mammoth that had passed by just moments before, like a kid playing a prehistoric game of follow the leader. This 23,000-year-old playground is the definitive proof that the ice-free corridor theory is dead. At this point in history, the path from Alaska to the rest of the continent was blocked by a wall of ice 2 miles high. If humans were already in New Mexico, they didn't walk through a gap in the glaciers. They were already settled, well-established, and comfortable enough to let their children play by the water's edge. It suggests that the American Southwest wasn't a brand new frontier to these people. It was home. By the time the first humans supposedly arrived 10,000 years later, these ghost tracks had already been buried for millennia, waiting for the wind to reveal the truth. But to understand why these footprints are so controversial, we have to look at the religion they replaced. The Clovis first ghost. To understand why a few footprints and a camel tooth caused such a massive civil war in the scientific community, you have to understand the Clovis first dogma. For the better part of the 20th century, the history of the Americas was treated like a closed book. The story was simple. About 13,000 years ago, a group of big game hunters from Siberia followed mammoths across a land bridge into Alaska. They waited for a gap to open between two massive ice sheets, the ice-free corridor, and then surged south, spreading across the continent with their signature Clovis spear points. If you suggested humans were here any earlier, you weren't just seen as wrong. You were often treated as a fringe theorist or a career-ending case. This wasn't just a theory, it was a scientific religion. Archaeological heavyweights spent decades debunking any site that claimed to be older than 13,000 years. If a site like Meadowcroft in Pennsylvania or Monteverde in Chile suggested a date of 15,000 or 19,000 years, critics would claim the carbon dating was contaminated by old coal, or that the stone tools were just naturally broken rocks. There was a psychological barrier to the idea that humans could have arrived during the heart of the Ice Age. The Clovis first ghost haunted every excavation, forcing researchers to work twice as hard to prove even the most basic facts about their findings. The problem with this rigid timeline was that it made humans look like a late arrival guest at their own party. It painted the first Americans as a single wave of migrants rather than a complex, multi-layered tapestry of cultures. But as the evidence from Oregon and New Mexico piled up, the ghost of Clovis began to fade. We realized that the first Americans weren't just one group of hunters. They were likely several different groups arriving at different times, using different technologies, and following different routes. The Clovis people were definitely here, and their spear points are masterpieces of ancient engineering. But they weren't the pioneers. They were the inheritors of a land that had already been walked on for 10,000 years. Moving past Clovis first has opened the floodgates for a more inclusive and accurate history. It allows us to look at the landscape not as an empty wilderness that was suddenly discovered, but as a home that has been nurtured and inhabited through the most extreme climate shifts in human memory. The religion of 13,000 years has finally been replaced by the messy, fascinating, and much older reality of the deep past. If the middle of the continent was a 2-mile-high wall of ice, the big question remains, how did they get here? The Kelp Highway versus the Ice Corridor. If the middle of North America was essentially a frozen fortress during the last glacial maximum, we have to throw the old walking across Canada map in the trash. For decades, the ice-free corridor was the only accepted route. Scientists imagined a narrow, muddy path opening up between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets. A harrowing 1,500-mile trek through a landscape that would have been a freezing, wind-swept void. But there's a massive problem. The timing doesn't work. Geological data shows that this corridor didn't become biologically viable, meaning it didn't have enough plants or animals to support humans until about 12,600 years ago. If people were already playing in New Mexico 23,000 years ago, they clearly didn't take the inland bus. This brings us to the Kelp Highway hypothesis, a theory that sounds more like a scenic cruise than a survival trek. The idea is that the first Americans were coastal navigators who hugged the Pacific Rim in skin boats. Instead of fighting 2-mile-high glaciers, they followed the shoreline from Siberia, down past Alaska, and along the coast of British Columbia. This route was teeming with life. Under the water was a massive, continuous forest of giant kelp that supported a rich ecosystem of fish, shellfish, sea otters, and seals. For a seafaring culture, this was a supermarket that stretched for thousands of miles. They didn't need to hunt mammoths to survive. They just needed to stay close to the water. This coastal route explains why we find sites like Rimrock Draw in Oregon or Monte Verde in Chile so much earlier than the inland sites. It's a lot faster to paddle a boat than it is to walk across a continent. The highway would have provided a consistent climate and a familiar food supply, allowing small groups to move south surprisingly quickly. It also explains why so much of the earliest evidence is missing. During the Ice Age, sea levels were nearly 400 feet lower than they are today. As the glaciers melted and the oceans rose, the original Kelp Highway campsites, villages, and tool-making spots were swallowed by the Pacific. We are only finding the people who decided to wander inland along rivers like the Columbia. The shift from boots to boats changes how we view the first Americans. They weren't just desperate hunters chasing a meal, they were skilled mariners with a sophisticated understanding of marine biology and navigation. They had to be. Navigating the North Pacific is no joke, even today. By accepting the Kelp Highway, we accept that the first Americans arrived with a high level of technology and an adventurous spirit that allowed them to skirt the edge of a frozen world. They didn't wait for the ice to melt to discover America. They found a way around it, proving that the ocean wasn't a barrier, it was a bridge. But beyond the boats and the bones, the most incredible part of this discovery is the humanity it reveals. Beyond tools, the human story. When we look at 23,000-year-old footprints or an 18,000-year-old stone scraper, it is easy to get bogged down in the cold, hard data of radiocarbon years and geological strata. But the real magic of these discoveries is how they peel back the layers of time to reveal something we often forget. These weren't just specimens or ancient migrants. They were people. They had families, they had routines, and they experienced the same emotions of wonder and exhaustion that we do today. The shift in our timeline hasn't just added years to the calendar, it has added depth to the human soul in the Americas. Take the tracks at White Sands, for example. In one specific trail, scientists found the prints of an adult woman, or perhaps a teenage boy, walking for nearly a mile. They were in a hurry, their feet slipping slightly in the mud. But the most touching detail is the intermittent appearance of tiny, toddler-sized footprints next to the larger ones. You can almost see the scene unfolding, a weary parent carrying a heavy child across a dangerous landscape, occasionally setting them down to rest their arms or let the toddler stretch their legs. This isn't a discovery in the clinical sense. It is a universal moment of parenthood captured in stone. It tells us that even in a world of sub-zero temperatures and predatory megafauna, the primary focus was the care and movement of the next generation. Similarly, the tools at Rimrock Draw show a level of aesthetic care that goes beyond mere survival. The choice of bright orange agate for a scraper wasn't just about functionality, it was about the material. Someone thousands of years ago sat under that basalt overhang, chipping away at a beautiful piece of stone, perhaps appreciating its color as the sun set over the Oregon desert. We see evidence of fetching and carrying, where teenagers were likely tasked with gathering the right rocks or helping process the meat from a successful hunt. These were social groups with a division of labor, a shared language, and a culture that was passed down through stories and hands-on teaching. By pushing the timeline back, we realize that these people weren't just surviving the Ice Age, they were thriving in it. They had thousands of years to build a relationship with this land, to learn its rivers, its plants, and its seasons. They weren't strangers in a strange land. They were home. This realization changes the discovery of America from a sudden event into a long, beautiful, and deeply human epic. This shift doesn't just change American history. It sends a massive ripple effect through our understanding of global human evolution. The global ripple effect. The rewriting of the American timeline doesn't just shuffle the dates in a few local museums. It sends a massive shockwave through our global understanding of human evolution and migration. For decades, the narrative of Homo sapiens was one of a slow, steady crawl out of Africa, across Eurasia, and finally, almost as an afterthought, into the Americas. We were portrayed as a species that only mastered the most extreme environments at the very last second. But if humans were already settling into New Mexico 23,000 years ago, it means our ancestors were far more adaptable, far more adventurous, and far more technologically capable much earlier than we ever dared to believe. This discovery forces us to look back at the starting line in Siberia and East Asia. For someone to reach Oregon or New Mexico by 18,000 to 23,000 years ago, they had to have mastered cold weather survival and potentially maritime navigation long before that. It suggests that the great expansion of humanity wasn't a cautious tiptoe, but a confident stride. It puts the peopling of the Americas on the same level as the prehistoric voyaging that settled Australia 50,000 years ago. We are seeing a global pattern of a restless, intelligent species that refused to be blocked by glaciers or oceans. Furthermore, these dates align much more closely with the oral histories of many indigenous nations. For a long time, Western science and traditional knowledge were at odds, with science insisting on a recent arrival, and indigenous elders speaking of ancestors who were here since time immemorial, or during the time of the giant animals. Suddenly, The fringe stories and the new science are saying the exact same thing. This creates a bridge between modern archaeology and ancient wisdom, suggesting that our collective memory as a species is much longer and more accurate than we gave it credit for. Ultimately, the global ripple effect is one of humility. It reminds us that every time we think we've reached the beginning of the human story, we find a footprint or a tool buried just a little bit deeper. It suggests that the map of human history is still full of blank spaces, and that the pioneers of the Ice Age were far more like us, curious, brave, and remarkably resilient than we ever imagined. If we keep digging, the final question isn't just how far back the clock goes, but what else we've missed. The discovery of the Oregon tools and the White Sands footprints has shattered the glass ceiling of American archaeology.
A team of archaeologists at the University of Oregon have found one of North America's oldest human-occupied sites in southern Oregon.
We have moved from a rigid 13,000-year timeline to a fluid ancient epic that stretches back at least 10,000 years further than we ever dreamed. But the most exciting part of this paradigm shift is the realization that we are likely still just scratching the surface. If 23,000-year-old footprints can hide in plain sight in a popular national park for decades, what else is waiting in the acidic soils of the Amazon, the submerged shelves of the Pacific, or the deep caves of the Yukon? The final question isn't just about a date on a calendar. It's about acknowledging the incredible resilience of the human spirit. We are a species that walked and paddled into the unknown during the harshest climate the Earth has seen in millions of years. As the dirt is brushed away from the next impossible find, we must be ready to listen to what the silent Earth is finally telling us. Until the truth is found, these ancient pioneers remain ghosts in the landscape. Make sure to subscribe for more deep dives in this channel.